Hey and welcome to the Creative Odyssey podcast, a podcast about entrepreneurship, creativity, and personal growth by me, Emil and Jack. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Hey Jack, what's going on? How are you?
Hi Emil, thanks for inviting me on. It's nice to be here.
So first off, as I always do, I will let you have the chance to introduce yourself in your own words. So who are you, Jack?
Ooh, well, that's a existential question right there. So I don't know if I can fully answer that, but I'll try my best. Which is, I'm a guy out in Los Angeles who works with languages, works with technology, and currently is involved in a huge project involving language preservation, meaning endangered languages, like languages that have decreasing numbers of speakers, have like very few numbers of speakers that are in danger of disappearing. I work to preserve these in all kinds of ways, digitally, physically. Been doing documentary work about endangered languages to kind of like let people know about them, building AI and machine learning models for really rare niche languages so that in the future, even if they do disappear, there will still be an interactive record of them. And a lot of other little mini projects involved with that. But generally, I work with endangered languages, so like tiny little languages that, sometimes only have 5 speakers or 20 speakers, or sometimes, 0 native fluent speakers anymore. We did an interview with someone recently she learned the language. It was a California native indigenous language. She learned it, but her teacher was the last living speaker, but her teacher had died something like a decade ago. What about you, Emil? What do you do?
Yeah, I'm mostly involved in this podcast. Obviously, my biggest few projects all resolve around creativity in some kind of way. Mm-hmm. I'm writing a book currently, so language is also a huge tool. Funnily, I do not write it in my native tongue. I write it in English primarily, and think about translating it back to German sometime. But languages still caught my eye, and so the other thing is kind of team development service that I do in my studies, where we kind of learn applied entrepreneurship. So we are based in like real projects and like a real company, and not sit in lectures and listen to what entrepreneurship or how business should look like, and instead just try and run experiments and try to have services, mainly, sometimes products. And yeah, so that's the shorter version of what I'm doing. So let me kick off with some kind of thank you. I hope that it's cool. At least I enjoy it. And
let me ask you a question. Why are you writing the book in English instead of German's your native language, right?
Yeah, I'm German native. I hope my English is fine. I'm practicing.
Your English is great, man. It's perfect.
Thank you. I try to be like bilingual. I don't know if I can call me bilingual just by my own kind of criteria at this point. I don't know. But I'm writing it primarily in English because of the audience reach. And I kind of feel a bit more comfortable because it's not so deeply tied to my emotional processing of the words. And you're so used to listening to like English podcasts and read English books, and I got so used to this kind of like the sentences, the progression, the tone and voice of primarily American like nonfiction books, because that was my main focus the last few years. And so I thought it might be easier to do it in English first, even if it's counterintuitive, maybe.
No, that totally makes sense. And yeah, you can claim yourself as bilingual. One of the things I've, worked with languages, studied a lot of languages, like the definitions for, say, fluency or bilingualism, nobody fucking knows. It's all just, everyone's just making it up.
Yeah.
People claim they're fluent when they basically can order a coffee at a restaurant sometimes. Other people, can speak perfectly and they'll be like, oh, no, I'm not fluent. Like, I just speak a little bit. And then, they speak the language perfectly. People from Belgium do this all the time.
Yeah.
So if you're hosting a podcast and writing a book in English, like I say call yourself bilingual. Why not? Because bilingual doesn't mean that there isn't necessarily maybe a little bit of an accent or you get every single word right. But when I speak English, I don't get every single word right. It's language is it's a messy science. You know what I mean?
It is, and it's evolving fast. And I think that's one of the reasons you start to work on projects that are focused on like preserving languages.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many interesting kinds of languages, and you have just said that even there are none native fluent speakers of a language. That's really hard to grasp. So they're like extremely endangered and are going to die out in a decade or in less than a decade, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing.
There's languages dying. I mean, there's many languages dying every year, and there's some estimates as to how many, but really because these languages are so small and the tracking is so bad on them, people don't really know. There's a lot of languages where you look into it and it'll, the records will say something like, 32 known speakers as of 2011. And, given the fact that a lot of these languages tend to dying languages tend to have a very old speaker base. The average age will be 75 or 82 and a half or something like that. That, 32 speakers 10 years ago, does that mean there's 32 speakers today? Does that mean there's 10 speakers today? Does that mean there's any speakers today? It's so there's a lot of guesswork that goes into this. But yeah, that's one of the reasons that we got into this, that I really got into this once I sort of realized the scope of the problem, because it felt important. It felt like there's all these languages disappearing. And once a language disappears, it especially if there's not a lot or no written content, like if they, if it was a largely oral language, doesn't have a lot of literary works, or most times no literary works. Once it disappears off the face of the planet. And, this makes me sad, but also there's, we discover medicines from languages. We'll analyze languages, especially now with AI, from the Amazon rainforest or whatever, and figure out that, they're calling this plant with a medicinal word. Maybe we should look into that. Oh shit, this plant has a ton of medicinal properties. We never would have known had we not, looked into it. Or I've discovered a lot about human population movements through language, figuring out one of the reasons they figured out Sanskrit was an Indo-European language was using linguistic backtracing and finding out that the word beech tree was the same in both languages, which they, and it was kind of, for a long time, it had been argued that was Sanskrit Indo-European? Was it not Indo-European? And, a lot of people said no, and a lot of people said it was unprovable. Turns out it was, and which means that there was definitely a population movement from Europe into the Indus Valley, or into India, essentially.
Yeah, so the movement is really something that shapes the language, and nothing changed as much as the language. And even the English we speak today is vaguely different than it was 200-300 years ago. Was almost indistinguishable, and the first encounter I had with the language that is not that extremely endangered, but was on the decline, was actually the Basque language of the Basque country in the north of Spain, which is the oldest European language and has no relation to any other language in Europe. Of course, there are some leaned words from other languages like computer or stuff like that is just got into the language, but they reclaimed the native speaker base. It was on the decline because of the Franco, the fascist Franco regime in Spain, but they gained back their native speaker base, and I think that's so astonishing to just pick up the language that is so deeply on the decline. So but there's still much of a community left to resurrect the language. If you have multiple families, multiple institutions, if you make it like a official language of a region, then you can resurrect it. But if you have such a little base of speakers, or like so many not that much of existing networks where the language is spoken, it's so hard to kind of pick up the language and just speak to someone who will understand it. There's no like feedback loop of a language, because language just evolves through speaking to another person.
Yeah, I love the Spanish. Can I question? Can I swear in this podcast, or is this PG-13?
I never thought about that. I don't usually swear with you. Go ahead. I'm not.
Because I was just. I was about to say the Spanish are the fucking gnarliest language preservationists on planet Earth, and I love them for it. Like, I mean, with the Basques, like they were obviously, had ETA, which was straight up like a terrorist group. They were, blowing up people, killing people, like all kinds of stuff for independence. But language was a big part of it. And with Catalunya, it was the same thing. When Franco was, president of Spain, they'd have posters on the walls that say like, "Don't bark like a dog, speak Spanish." And it would show a person speaking Catalan. It was very, this is a really common thing where you have sort of like a fascist or fascist light government. And one of the things they want to do is force everyone to speak the same language. And this is like a big cause of like language disappearance. But rarely do you get an example like Catalunya or the Basque Country where it doesn't just come back, but really comes back as the dominant language of the area, Yeah. Like if you go to, I went to University of Barcelona for a little while, and most of the classes there are taught in Catalan. And if you raise your hand to ask a question and you ask it in Spanish, the professor will answer you back in Catalan. They're very, very proud of their languages, and it's a huge part of their life and their culture and everything like that, which is awesome. Which is really it's very impressive to see. And yeah, the Basques especially is really cool. I mean, it's a fascinating language. They are arguably the only unconquered group in Europe. The Basque Country is all hilly and mountainous. Great surfing too, so there's some good beaches and everything. But strategically, it's very similar to somewhere like Afghanistan, where you have hills and mountains and lots of caves. So every time the Romans would enter, from the Romans to the African Moors to whoever, they just couldn't kick out the Basques, because they would go, one, they were gnarly fighters, and two, they would go up into the hills and hide in the caves and do guerrilla warfare and stuff, and it just like wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were. Yeah, I mean, one of the most interesting languages. As far as I can tell, last I read, there have been some tiny little indicators that, I mean, clearly Basque was like pre-Proto-Indo-European indigenous language. So I think it's the only the only language in Europe not related to Indo-European. I might be wrong about that, but I think that that's the case. And basically, yeah, it was the indigenous language from the Neolithic era before, and it was again, amongst all these waves of conquerors, we've used language to figure out that there was an Indo-European empire about 5,000 years ago that came in and conquered essentially all of Europe. We know that they replaced the people who built Stonehenge. They used some genetic stuff to help figure that out. And it seems like the Basques were one of the only that they weren't able to get to. And they found traces of some other languages, like little signs like that people would put above doors and stuff to indicate that there was other indigenous languages in Spain at the time before that conquest, which makes sense, of course. I mean, there was people living there besides the Basques, just the Basques were the only ones that didn't get conquered and thus had their language turned into someone else's language.
Yeah, that's like really fascinating at this day and age that they still manage to keep that. And parts of why you are doing this is because languages are dying, which is a fact, and they still manage to keep it alive and the culture. And one thing that caught my interest about your response from the question before is that if you are in, let's say, the Barcelona area in Catalonia, if you're asked something in Spanish, you get a Catalan response. And this makes me think that preservation of a language is sometimes a really strict thing and a real non-negotiable identity thing. There's no second guessing. That is just, we straight up prefer this kind of language here, and we do everything in our power to preserve and make it dominant here. And do you think that being like really strict and really focused on keeping that language in an area is needed to make it this widespread and used, or could there be some lighter approaches and not this dominance based ones?
Not to come down too strong, but yeah, I think if you want to make the distinction between language preservation and language revitalization is where you take a language that's maybe endangered or almost at the point of death and you bring it back. So I just made a documentary with a small team, my man Nigel directing, about the Sami in northern Norway. And they did what's called language revitalization, where their language was basically at the brink of death because the Norwegian government, there had been all kinds of programs that had discouraged the use of the language, and they took the kids out of the schools and put them into Norwegian schools and all kinds of stuff like that. But then they started bringing it back. There's all these programs. There's all these schools that are either bilingual or only in Sami, things like that. And to do that, like if you want to take a niche language, especially in a place that's bilingual, and bring it, get it big again, like get the kids speaking it, make it normal, like, Catalan or Basque, as opposed to maybe something like Scottish in England, where, there's people who speak it, but not that many anymore. And it's not really very dominant in any real way. Everyone just speaks English. Yep. You have to be really forceful. I mean, maybe forceful is the wrong word, but you have to put a lot of energy into it, because you need situations where you need people to be speaking it to each other just on a casual basis. Like you need kids to be hanging out and speaking the language, because if you have something where, like in Ireland, for example, Irish was a really good example of a language that was brought back in a big way, but is kind of in a bit of danger right now. And part of the reason is that it's a bilingual society, and you have a lot of, you go there, there's like street signs are in Irish. But really, if you want to hear people talking Irish to each other, it's kind of only in like a couple of really small towns.
Yeah.
And it's mostly the more elderly. It's another one where, like if you hear someone speaking Irish, there's a good chance they're over 60 or over 70. Not everybody, but it's not like, whereas in Catalunya, the 15-year-olds are playing Fortnite and talking in Catalan, or, they're going to the bars and like you're flirting with girls in Catalan and stuff like that. Like everybody really speaks Catalan and they take a lot of pride in speaking Catalan. The schools only teach Catalan. So like the universities are only in Catalan. Like and the easy thing to do would be to just speak Spanish. This is something Iceland is facing right now, because Iceland has a population of, I think it's like 250,000. It's not exact. I think Reykjavik.
Yeah,
My apologies to the Reykjavik. Yeah, is about half of that, and they're doing a really good job. Like from everything I hear, like they are speaking Icelandic. Icelandic is a very dominant language, but something like 99% of the population speaks almost perfect English. And so it's a challenge, and there's a lot of people in Iceland who are concerned that it would be very easy for it to just become an English-speaking place.
Yeah.
Which it would. I mean, it's sort of like, this is one of the reasons that I'm doing this work now, that I'm concerned about this now, is that there's so many forces because of the internet and because of globalization and these things that I love. Like, well, I mean, they're a mixed bag, but
yeah,
I'm not anti-globalization, nor am I anti the internet, nor am I anti-technology. Actually, I have worked for tech startups and all kinds of shit like that. But, you're not going to be able to watch Squid Game in Icelandic. You can watch Squid Game in English or in Korean or in Chinese or Japanese or German,
Yeah.
It's for these rare languages. And then Icelandic, it's not even it's not even a bilingual society. Like if you're living in Shanghai has a language called Shanghaise. Everything is in Chinese, and the Chinese government is forcing everything to be in Chinese.
Yeah.
And yet they continue speaking it, but really there's a ton of pressure. If you're just a 12-year-old kid and you're training to go to a good college, which is, Beijing Normal University, which is like the Harvard of China, and you're watching TV and you're talking to, you're online talking to other Chinese kids, and you're, maybe trying to get dates with Chinese girls and stuff like that. Like almost all of that's happening in Chinese. So if you want to promote a local language in a dual, bilingual society, a lot of energy needs to go into it, and by energy, I mean like setting up situations where people have to be speaking in the second language. So, Catalunya, again, like they did a great job of, you go to elementary school in Catalunya, it's in Catalan. It's not in fucking Spanish. And here in the States, a lot of our native languages, like Navajo is one that I've done quite a bit of work with. And it's, the Navajo reservation is not wealthy. It's like one of the poorest parts of the country. Mm. And until pretty recently, it was, the people weren't that concerned about it. It's like historically significant, but, and they wanted to be Navajo speakers, and pretty much everybody has been on board in recent times for all the Navajo to speak Navajo, but they don't really have the resources. They don't have the resources to set up all Navajo schools. They don't have enough speakers to be teachers. And if you live, you're out in the desert in New Mexico or Arizona speaking Navajo, like if you want to move to Los Angeles or New York, or you want to, whatever the case may be, or join the Army. It's some of the highest recruitment into the Marines of any group in the United States. You're probably not going to be speaking Navajo. You're going to be speaking English. So it's not that the desire's not there, but there's just so many resources, like physical resources, like schools and books and TV shows, as well as just, the kind of willpower of the people to go all in on a language to really make a society duolingual. So it's tough, man. It's really tough.
It's really tough. And on the Navajo example, I've seen that Duolingo is even like having a language course to like just learn it. I'd like to hear your perspective on this, because Duolingo is obviously not the best way to learn a language, but they kind of presenting it and having it, they are offering to kind of get in touch with the language. What do you have to say about that?
I got two. So first I'll talk about the Navajo part, and then I'll talk about the Duolingo part.
Yeah.
I've talked to people who were involved with that project, and they weren't especially happy with it. Now, this isn't exactly Duolingo's fault. The Native American languages, they're a little sensitive about their languages. They've been kind of like screwed over and, put on reservations, and, there was like massacres back in the day, and all kinds of, like, a lot of bad stuff has happened. Oh. And so they tend to be very like protectionist of like their culture and their language and kind of everything. And so it's not that often that they let projects come in and work with them. And this has actually been something I've dealt with, is they're just, I don't blame them at all, but they're a little bit closed off when it comes to working with outsiders. So they did this project with Duolingo, and kind of the perception is it didn't really work. Like not a lot of people were using it. Yeah. And so they're, right or wrong, they were kind of like, we let these people in, and these tech people in, and these linguists in, and they did this thing, and it didn't even help us. So the Navajo, from the people I've talked to, which is anecdotal, I'm not, I've known a couple of people that were involved with this project, but I'm not claiming I know like everybody on the Navajo reservation or anything like that. Obviously. So that is one side of it is, and I think part of it is, when we were just talking about like, how do you make a language active? Like, how do you create a bilingual society? It's probably not through Duolingo. What you need is like, you need schools, you need kids speaking the language fluently with other kids. You need people hanging out, speaking Navajo with each other. And, doing an app is, it's more oriented. Like, let's say Duolingo worked perfectly. Mm-hmm. And, you could use Duolingo for 3 months and get fluent in a language. It's still kind of aimed at people outside of the culture versus people inside of it. Yes. And so it sort of becomes a thing more for hobbyists, who are like, oh, wouldn't it be fun to learn Navajo, as opposed to actual Navajo speakers who want to like help create like a bilingual society. That being said, I've posted a million times on Twitter that nobody's ever gotten fluent from Duolingo. And Duolingo itself, the CEO came out and had some comment like, something like, if it comes, between entertainment and education, we always side with entertainment, something like that. Yeah. Duolingo is basically like a slot machine, but with a little bit of language learning in it. So I'm not totally against it. It's not bad if you want to get from zero to like medium beginner. It's not the worst thing in the world. Although I would say there's better apps. Duolingo does this weird thing where they repeat words over and over and over. So it's not very good on the vocab side. But
yeah,
kind of a problem with the apps in general is it'll get you. They're good at getting you to that high beginner, maybe lower intermediate or something. But at a certain point, you got to go talk to people.
yes.
You're not going to get fluent from Duolingo or anything like that. And so, I don't think it was a bad project. Again, I know people who were not very happy with how that project went. Possibly their expectations were a little too high as to what would result from it. But I don't know if throwing Duolingo at the problem is going to get you where is going to get all of the kids in your neighborhood to speak your local language, for example. I just don't really think it functions like that in terms of demographics who use it and how if they get good enough from it and all kinds of stuff like that. So, yeah. But I think it's, I come from a tech background. I think we should try everything. So I'm not against the idea of doing Duolingo for these languages. I think we should throw everything we possibly can at these languages,
Well, I didn't take the Navajo course in Duolingo, but I do use it, not in English, funnily, because I can speak English fluent enough to not need a language learning app in order to get better. I do use it in Spanish because I do not have any contact really to practice my Spanish when I'm in Germany. I speak German a lot. German will never face the problem of losing its language. We're so afraid of speaking a single word of English, and we Germans dub everything we can, and it's the total opposite of Endangered. I think it's really a strong language when it comes to the existence of it.
Yeah.
But getting back to the Duolingo thing, I just use it to kind of so my mind can stay a little bit in that language, even if what I learn is total nonsense, especially if the context is not there, and I don't need to know how to, I don't know, how to order a skateboard, or that my aunt used to shop whatever. It is so nonsensical and not context based. But I realized that at least I have this, and when I'm in Spain, I can speak Spanish pretty good at a beginner's level. And as soon as I went back to Germany for a longer period of time, I'm not fluent. Even the few Spanish people that are here in my town, I try to speak to them, but there's not a single sentence flowing. It would feel so awkward. Yeah, it's a funny thing. But especially, I wouldn't think about speaking Navajo to someone ever, even if I would want to. So I can totally see your perspective on Duolingo, and thanks for sharing real insights, real insights on this, and not just opinions.
Oh, you got it. You got it. Yeah, this is why one of the aspects of my project is to improve machine learning and AI for these niche languages. Because one of the, I keep talking about the fact that if you speak, you want to speak Navajo, but then you're also just want to chill out and watch some Netflix, it has to happen in one of the dominant languages, German or English or Japanese or, Spanish or something like that. You can't watch these in Navajo. But if we have really good real-time translators and really good machine learning models, and all this stuff's improved, which we're really, we're very, very close to. So I don't know if it's going to be in 2 years or in 10 years, but pretty soon, the way that you can use Google Translate from German to English or German to Spanish, and it's still not perfect, but 5 years ago it was 75% there. Now it's closer to like 98, 99% there. And the mistakes, you're usually able to just be like, oh, I made a little mistake, but I still understand what's going on.
Yes.
If you can, we're not that far away from having this potentially for all these like small languages, and then having this as the interface layer between you. So something where you could watch Squid Game, like they don't have to hire a translator to put it into Navajo. Just a machine learning model runs, or maybe you've got some proprietary software on your computer that you just, that it runs it through. Like you buy a plugin and it can just turn every Netflix show into, and it costs $2.99 a month or something that you extra that you pay to Netflix, and it translates everything into Navajo on their side. Or, the real-time translation part, like another reason that English especially is so dominant, but English, Spanish, Chinese, a little bit of Korean, Japanese, is because of remote work. If you live in Brazil or you live in Mongolia or you live in India and you want to work for Microsoft, it's a huge advantage to be able to speak English. It's a gigantic advantage to be able to speak English. And for some roles, like I think that people should be good speakers. Like if you're going to have a sales role, like you should be able to speak the language. You should be able to be persuasive, convince people, things like that. But I worked as a programmer for a million years. And if you're a programmer, like let's say you're living in Germany and your English is total shit, which Emil, yours is not. Your English is amazing. But someone who's like, he's like genius, autistic, one of the best programmers you ever met in your life, and his English is just fucking horrible. But the only times he needs to really speak English is to like do a 15-minute stand-up meeting in the morning and then send Slacks with his GitHub repos to his boss who's out in Seattle or whatever. Like, there's no reason that can't be done with a machine learning translation model. Like, there's no, the sales guy, you want him to speak the language really, really, really well so he can be convincing. But the programmer who their language skills are functional, like you want their brain power when it comes to algorithms. You don't care if they can like conjugate a verb correctly. There's no reason that person should have their remote work abilities hampered by the fact that they don't speak the language. When there's like a million different types of translation models that could be used. I mean, you could use ChatGPT right now. I bet there's people who do this, who have remote work, put all their Slacks through ChatGPT and then send it out,
Yeah.
And then this takes a lot of the pressure off. This means that guy can work for an English company or can work for a Chinese company or can work for a Japanese company. And doesn't have to feel the obligation to learn fluent English. And as you said, in Germany, German's going to exist for another 10,000 years because, y'all are just really, adamant about the language.
Yeah.
But if you're talking
a bit lazy.
A bit lazy?
Yeah,
the
when
Germans?
it comes to when they're not usually lazy. They're really Germans like to work. They're not the lazy kind of people in general. But when it comes to speaking other languages, Germans are usually portrayed as like they are on vacation on a hotel in Mallorca or some kind of Spanish island, and they really get there and expect everyone to speak German. They're just everywhere they go. They expect that the other person in front of them will understand and respond in some kind of in some German. And even if they're speaking English, it's like a skeleton of English sentences with German grammar and German words infused. It's like a total mess. I don't know why this is. I think it's probably because the German language is really historical bound, and there's lots of literature, and there is many original things in German language.
Mm-hmm.
and there's not really the need to be out there in English that much. I don't know why that is. Might be anecdotal, but I've seen that at least most of the other European countries are definitely speaking English more often. But I haven't noticed that in Spain. They prefer Spanish over English. Even if they are fluent in English, they will. I asked many in Spain if they are not that confident. They are not confident to speak in English, and I think that's one of the reasons Germans don't like to speak English. I mean, even the th sound was like this so embarrassing because it sounds like you have a lisp, and Germans don't like this. They talk like this or this because they are afraid to use like this. I don't know why.
Wait, say the word sink and then think.
Think. I think so. That sounds very German to you.
I think so.
Yeah, that sounds like the stereotypical. If you go like a Hollywood movie and they're portraying a German and he's talking like this very embarrassing German accent. Yeah.
I think, Mr. Bond, that yeah.
Yeah, now it sounds like a German villain. It's funny.
Yeah. Well, this is with language, you really have to throw yourself into it. Like the best way to get a good accent, to get a fluent accent, is to mimic someone that you like. Is like find an actor or like a speaker or like a famous person that you like. Listen to everything they do, and don't be like, oh, I'm going to speak like a Spanish person. Instead, you got to be like, I'm going to speak like Antonio Banderas, or I'm going to speak like Christoph Waltz or something like that, because our brains, you get this thing where you feel, or I don't feel very embarrassed by stuff. This is sort of my curse and my superpower.
Yeah.
But like a lot of people get really embarrassed to do the accent. They speak Americans speak German, and they don't want to like go all the way. They want to be like, ich habe ein blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Whereas like what you think sounds like with Italian, what you think you're being like, oh, I'm being stereotypical. Is this offensive? Sono qua per fare. No,
or being like pretentious and acting.
Yeah. But really, that's exactly what you need to do. You need to act like the stereotype of the language. Or, better, but since people don't want to act like the stereotype, the best thing to do is find someone and pretend to be him. Like, be like Brad, talk, like, don't just be like, oh, I kind of want to sound like Brad Pitt, but literally be like, I want to be able to do a perfect Brad Pitt impression or a perfect Tom Cruise impression. And then when you talk, people won't realize you're doing an impression. They'll just be like, oh, he speaks perfectly. Because people aren't that good. They're not that precise with voices to the ability where they can tell, unless you're doing like Christopher Walken or someone who's got this like really specific voice. But yeah, that's totally true. The embarrassment factor and the like, oh, I've been trained my whole life that if I say think instead of sink, it sounds like I have a lisp, but really in English, they're two different, it's two different phonemes.
Yeah.
And they mean, two entirely different words.
Yeah, and I don't know where I picked this up, but I just recently have seen like a video. I don't know if it was on YouTube Shorts or something like that. It was that the accent is extremely important to like the cohesion of the language. So you're not pretending to sound like you want to act as if you were an Italian. The way of speaking makes you actually be understood. And it was mind-blowing. So I'm not acting like I'm the perfect speaker of another language if I try to imitate their accent. It's just what this language should sound like in general, so you can be understood. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let me swing back or forth, whatever, to like how you get this project going. So I've seen that you are an OSV fellow, and just quick for the listeners, explain what this means and how did this impact your work on preserving languages?
Oh yeah. So I had been working with preserving languages for quite some time. I had done, number of projects related to it. I got hooked up with OSV because they do this like year-long fellowship, which is a great program for anyone who's interested in applying. And I pitched them on this idea of using, they're an interesting group. It's a venture capital studio that invests in AI projects, not exclusively AI, but they do a lot of, AI and kind of interesting things surrounding that. They have a book publisher. They're a bunch of reading nerds in the best way possible, and are very kind of interesting, very outside of Silicon Valley. Have a number of interests, and so I pitched them this project as part of the fellowship, and they were into it. I think it was a combination of, they thought the technology was interesting. They thought that they definitely saw eye to eye on the cause. And one of the things that I've found is with language preservation is people are either they find it interesting or they don't care. So it's a bit polarizing in that sense. Like some people just, they're not that worried about languages disappearing, What are you going to do? But for people who kind of see the way I see, they realize that it's a big deal. And so with OSV, it was just a match made in heaven. We, got hooked up with them right away, got to take part in this awesome fellowship. And it's been great because there's all these other fellows. There's a lot of resources that that I can access through OSV. Jim O'Shaughnessy is a great guy himself, both to talk about movies and stuff with, in addition to the technology side. So, not too much more to say other than that. It's been a great partnership, and looking forward to doing quite a few more projects with them in the future.
That sounds really intriguing. And to be honest, I applied to not the fellowship but the grant. Let's see where this goes. I'm not trying to put too much pressure or hope on this case. I will see what the future will bring. And how exactly did it work out for you? So you got these resources. They are financially supporting your project. How did the setup go?
They're financially they're financially supporting me for this year. I've been doing a number of projects that have required some additional funding, so I've been going and finding. So I've gotten some funding. We're heading to Panama with the film crew to film a documentary about the Nobere language, which is it's very similar to Basque. It's a really, really old, probably from the Neolithic language out in Panama from another group of people that live out in the mountains. And it is so I managed to get kind of outside funding for that. Because it was going to be a little bit more than what I was going to be able to cover with just my fellowship. So the fellowship is basically paying for me, and then for all these other projects, I'm trying to rally other outsiders and outside funders. And in some cases, we did this, that documentary I was talking about in Norway. OSV came on as executive producer for that, so they gave us some additional money to go out and film that and make that, and that's going to be coming out in a couple of weeks. So I'll ask you to take a look and let me know what you think, and then also maybe blast that out to your listeners.
Yes, definitely.
But so OSV kind of set the baseline for me to be able to just work on these cool projects. But I've also been hustling my brains out trying to get these bigger projects off the ground as well. Because when it comes to both AI filmmaking and then doing things with niche languages which are outside the country, there's all three of those are not the easiest thing for a single person to do. Yeah. They're not that hard for a small team of people to do. They're not projects that, I'm not doing projects that require like millions of dollars, but, have had what this fellowship has ended up being is kind of a series of these like smaller, series of these kind of like slightly bigger projects that I've been getting off the ground, related to language preservation and everything like that. So, yeah, so it's been a blast. And they're very encouraging. I'll say this, like one of the first days, Jim was basically like, one of the reasons we chose you is because we want you to do a bunch of crazy stuff and experiment and go out there and, do really, show us what you got in terms of these projects. And I was like, all right, let's fucking do it. And so I've been trying to just go crazy and do really cool and public stuff ever since.
That sounds like a dream come true. I really like this. This reminds me kind of, these fellowships remind me of like merits, that ancient or like medieval or Renaissance era artists where it just gave them a bunch of money to do cool stuff and to pursue their art. Mm-hmm. And I like that this worldview of the OSV is not based on returns only in the case of like financial returns, but in like funding other cool stuff, and that you can just do cool stuff with a amount of money and funding, like language preservation, cultural things. I've seen there's funding for music. I mean, everything that touches humans, really. And
one of the guys, he's this guy just out in India who I became quite good friends with at a retreat that we did together. They gave him the $10,000 grant because what he told them and what he told me is he had never made music before. He had a dream that he was supposed to write a song, pitched them on the grant based off this idea that he had a dream he should write a song, wrote it, and it became a huge hit in India and got like 2 billion views on Spotify. And so now they've given him a fellowship to work on the full album. So
it's so crazy.
Yeah. And also to clarify, it's like, these dudes are like capitalist motherfuckers. Like they're not like, it's also not like a charity work, Yeah. But they have a venture capital arm, which is very investment oriented. And Jim, he ran an investment firm for decades and decades and decades. Like he's a guy who knows how to invest. He knows money. Yes. They have a book publishing arm. They have a film studio. All of these are just kind of small and growing, and they're trying to, make something out of them. But they're very oriented towards making money. With the fellowship as well, the projects we're doing are not, we didn't pitch it like, like if I had gone, every time I've pitched like a VC in I'm in LA. So a lot of times they're like, when I say Silicon Valley, it's more the Silicon Valley ecosystem rather than literally going to Sand Hill and pitching people on there. But, when I talk to VCs like that, it's like, okay, show me your user growth, show me your daily active users, things like that. Like they want to see like numbers related to this. The fellowship is aimed at really big ideas, which may or may not pay off, but there is an element of if they do pay off, they could be huge. So for mine, one of the aspects is if we kind of get this is if you have AI and machine learning to translate everything and act as this like interface for the world, that could drastically change how the world interacts with languages. Like all of a sudden, you don't, if you live in the Brazilian rainforest, you don't have to learn English. You can keep speaking Pariah, and still work at Microsoft and still, play Counter-Strike with your friends and stuff like that. There's another girl in the fellowship who does DNA writing. Like literally what she is focused on is how to store the things like her pitches. I want to store a library in an actual tree. But one of the aspects of it is if you write in DNA, you have trillions and trillions and trillions of bits to work with. So it's basically infinite storage. So if you can crack this code, and people are doing this, this is not like a technology nobody's done. It's more like a technology that we're trying to get cheaper and more effective.
Yeah.
But this would be, the long-term play here is if she's successful, this could be a serious, this could like seriously affect how we think about storage space. Like we go from, like, oh, a terabyte of data is like a lot of data to being like, a terabyte of data is like a drop in the ocean for what I can store on 3 strands of DNA, which are, like, 1 micron in diameter. You know what I mean? So it would like exponentially increase the ability for us to just store information. So it's not that OSV is like, go play around, go do fun stuff. We don't care. It's more like there's they're looking for interesting projects that do have a long-term potential to them, usually in a very like sci-fi kind of way, like really big bet, long-term moonshot kind of stuff. But then also that are really cool, that kind of like spur the imagination and things like that. Like we, as the fellows, we definitely act as like, we tend to get in the newspapers more than some of the other projects and things like that, or like, or do things that are newsworthy, that are PR worthy, that get people interested in OSV, things along those lines.
So more like a cultural growth and high risk, high potential kind of thing when it comes to like, if you're looking at it as a rational investment, where you have like a small chance in really changing the world, but still, if you can make this happen, the world will change. So
Exactly.
Ideas this big. I'm just a bit baffled about the sheer amount of crazy and extraordinary projects you can do with the help of like a fellowship or something like that, and having the freedom to pursue this. And what can you really encourage to anyone who has like these crazy, or so to speak, crazy big kind of ideas or experiments?
Just in general, what would I say to somebody who's got some big idea? Pursue it. I think that there's an element of, if you want to get people interested, whether it's to help you out or to fund you, big ideas get sold a lot more than small ideas, which is, it's counterintuitive, where you think like, it's easy to think like, ooh, I'm going to build an app that for people to track their workout because everyone works out. It's a huge market,
Yeah.
But these, things like this end up being pretty difficult to fund and to get people on board with and things like that, because one, there's 100 people, there's a million people that have had the same idea and have built the same kind of app. And you have this question of like, well, if it works, like if people actually do want this, how come no one's done it before? And then you look and you see like, oh, actually there's 100 apps in the market that do this. So there's a lot of competition. And so what makes yours special? And then you're on this thing of, you have to pitch it based off of numbers. Like I was saying before, that's kind of where the SaaS aspect of VC culture has gone. So all of a sudden it's like, because it's not a big idea, you can't pitch the idea. You got to pitch the success. You got to show that people like yours more than 100 other competitors, and on the flip side, if you have a small idea, like, oh, I'm going to make Instagram, but it's only going to be for gerbils. People can post their gerbils on here because, like I've done the numbers and there's 10 million gerbil owners in the United States and every one of them is on Instagram. So why wouldn't they want their own social media platform? Then the other aspect of kind of a smaller idea like that is that you'd be like, well, how come this doesn't already exist? Like if I can, Emil, if you can go and build this React app in 2 days, that's Instagram for gerbils and launch it to the App Store, how come no one else has done it if there's no barriers to entry? And then you find out like, well, it's because gerbil people just post on normal Instagram. They don't need their own social media platform. They just, they can just use the ones that already exist. And on top of that, neither one of those ideas, I mean, they're great. Like I love to work out. I love gerbils. I'm not against these ideas, but they're not like, you can't imagine telling, someone about that and then being like, holy fucking shit, I'd never thought about that. Oh my God, my mind is blown. Like this changes everything, like, and nor is it something like, SpaceX where it's not a new idea, but it's like magnificently huge technology, things that you watch the SpaceX launches and people are just like mind blown. It's like going to the Sistine Chapel or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think there's actually a huge advantage to people that do have big, crazy ideas that have a big long-term payoff because they haven't been done and they capture people's imagination. And the reason they haven't been done is because they're so out there, So something like DNA writing is like, well, why would I get involved with DNA writing? And part of you is like, wow, it's really cool. And then you realize like, oh, there actually is a long-term potential here. And then she starts talking about planting a forest where every tree holds, the entire Library of Congress. And you're like, oh, that's a really fucking cool idea. Like, there's an imagination side to it. And it's just something that you don't hear every day. You don't, you could pitch, you talk to a VC and they've heard the workout app 100 times that month. Yeah. But they haven't heard somebody talking about like making a library built into actual trees, And so if nothing else, at least it's interesting. So I'd say like if you have big idea, and big ideas do tend to require other people, not always, but often, whereas like, Instagram for gerbils, you can do yourself. And if you really do think there's a market for Instagram for gerbils or some project like that, go for it. Build it, launch it, try and get customers. But if you have the big crazy idea, that nobody's working on, that you don't hear anyone talking about, but you see this vision, I would try and, one, apply to OSV for the fellowship, and two, see who you can get on board. Like you'll be very surprised. Like, a lot of people in tech are tired of working for these kind of crappy little SaaS companies or working for Salesforce and, perfecting the user onboarding flow, by moving buttons around by 5 pixels or whatever it is to, based off analytics. Like a lot of people, especially in tech, like want to work on big, huge, cool stuff. So yeah. If you got a big, cool, huge idea, don't think it's too big. Don't think it's too big. Try and get it out there. And it might take a while. It's like the big stuff doesn't happen overnight, but the big stuff is the things that change the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for taking the time. So there's a lot of stuff I need to process when it comes to this conversation, and I'm super thankful for taking the time being here. And yeah, so that's it.
All right, Emil. Well, thank you very much. Thanks you for having me on.
Bye.
Cheers.
If you've enjoyed listening to my podcast, you can show support by following me and hit the bell to never miss out on my latest content. I'd appreciate a positive review too. You can find more of my content on www.emildroot.com. Thanks and bye for now.